We're live.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining Office Hours. Again, this is Office Hours 13, and just wanted to say thank you to Alex for taking over last week. I was poorly and wasn't able to even join to help with the conversation. So thank you, Alex, for taking care of that last week. I understand you're busy, but there's a copy of, you're going to do the recording from last week will be put up at the same time as the recording for this week. Is that right?
Yes. Correct.
Okay, cool. All right, let's get into it. So regular discussion topics. ETH Node Watch, not a huge amount of stuff here. What did I pick up on? I don't know if it was discussed last week, but there's a relatively new version, like 7 days old or something, of Open Ethereum version 3.25. I haven't noted any of the changelog for that. I didn't see anything that I specifically thought was interesting. Personally, I'm already running that. I test upgraded a few days ago, and then I pushed the same upgrade to my production node, and all seems to be running fine. Is anyone else upgraded?
Do you still see some memory leak that builds up in the memory on that version? Because in the changelog they mentioned that they are now handling memory more strict on the code level, so that the compiler has not too many freedom to fuck things up, basically.
Right. I mean, I noticed some time ago now, it was maybe 2 or 3 months ago now, that Open Ethereum stopped just eating up all the memory that I gave it. Which would occasionally cause it to it would do some weird stuff like stop responding and not really tell you that there's actually a problem.
Well, for us it was even worse. It was eating up until what we gave it, and then it started eating everything else, and eventually crashed the whole machine.
No, I haven't seen any specific leaks myself. Has anybody else seen anything like that with Open Ethereum?
There was one guy that reported the same things that we saw, but other than that, no one else.
Right, interesting. And you're running like were you running 5 nodes or something like that?
Only 3 Open Ethereums, but like 6 TurboGeth or 5.
Right, and they're all archive nodes.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting to see how this new one does in terms of stability.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still running 3.2.4, and like my memory usage and generally resource usage is very stable.
You must be lucky then. What kind of what server are you using? Like what CPU, RAM, and all that sort of stuff?
32 core, 128 gigs RAM.
AMD?
Yeah.
Okay. I think we also have AMD, Sebastian, right?
Yeah. No big difference there.
Interesting.
Okay, the last update I have is TurboGeth. TurboGeth put out a new release on the 1st of May, and it includes some changelog around pull request that a guy whose name I apologize, but put a PR with some trace-related features. I started syncing this today. So
I got
copy
confirmation that it doesn't fully work yet, but they're close to.
Okay, so progress is being made. That's good to hear.
I tried to figure out today if this is still based on the JavaScript implementation or if it's like fully native Go, but I couldn't really figure that.
Right. One other question I had around TurboGeth, and just in case anyone else has experience, I've just started playing around with the metrics for TurboGeth. Is anyone else using the native metric endpoint for TurboGeth right now? No? Okay. Well, it's there. You should use it. I've just set it up recently. I pulled there's a Docker Compose specifically for Prometheus, and I just sort of like started pulling bits out of that to do meditation, but I found that the dashboards aren't entirely happy about me doing that, so I was just interested to see if anybody else had experience. Okay, I keep it on the list because I want to make sure we keep on top of it. The Bezu client. Has anyone else started syncing a Bezu client? I know Cohen, and there was another chap, another indexer who was reported versus experience on this? Just anybody else picked one up?
I'm not gonna wait 3 months for that to sync. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just wondering if it really, one person's experience doesn't mean it's going to be the same for everyone, right?
From what I've heard, that's the usual wait time for it to sync.
Is it a fork of the Parity client, or is it entirely new code base?
No, it's its own thing.
Completely own thing. Okay, it's definitely worth playing around with then.
I don't know if anybody has ever mentioned Nethermind, but I don't know exactly what the state of their trace support is, but the last I looked at Nethermind, a good few months ago, they were working towards parity trace support, and their sync performance, I believe, is quite good.
Define quite good.
DYOR.
Okay. I mean, TurboGuest takes 2 days. That's
it's
why
primarily they're focused on ETH2, right, Chris?
No. Well, they may have a ETH2 client, but at least the Nethermind I'm talking about is an ETH1 client in .NET.
In .NET? Well, okay.
I know someone was talking like last summer, before we even started with the mission control testnet, about Nethermind, but I don't know if anyone actually tried it.
I know that Vitalik was running Nethermind on his laptop.
Yeah, I believe Nethermind's a pretty capable client.
I'll have to take a look at that. I was whenever I hear Nethermind, I just thinking immediately that the client's for ETH2.
Chris, do you know the size of that thing?
I don't know, full archive trace state size, no.
Okay.
Well, it's interesting. Vic from Grasset says that just to make sure it's in the recording, that he has seen memory leaks on all of his Open Ethereum nodes. So there you go. More evidence that there's an issue. Vic, what version are you running right now?
I'm more curious why it happens on some machines and on others doesn't. And when it happens on all of our machines simultaneously.
Wow, you're on 2.4. You're a brave man.
3 to 4. I think he meant.
I kicked myself out, excuse me. Back. It'd be nice to have a chat window or something for the stage as well. Just too many. I'm clicking on too many things and getting myself lost. Anyway, let's move on, guys. Does anybody have any other blockchain node related topics they want to bring up before we move on? Okay. So Repo Watch. Before Seb, in case you have anything, I just want to cover off the vector piece. So a couple of days ago, Yanis announced that for the current, sort of the next evolution of the migration, Vector is on pause. The integration of Vector with Scalar, and a new release is coming on the testnet. Is imminent. It should be coming within a matter of days, where Scalar is using receipts based on allocations rather than vector transfers. So I want to put that at the top of the Repo Watch because that's really important. We need everybody on board when that comes out so we can do some proper load testing before things get to mainnet. I don't know if Ford, if you want to add anything to what's going on in that area right now.
Yeah, I think that was a really good summary of the feature. And just to add, I expect we'll have something for you guys later today, if not tomorrow, with a new release for testnet, and then a new round of query testing and bashing on that.
What is the rationale behind that? Specifically pushing back vector integration?
I think, I haven't been as close on that work, but basically like getting that final 5% of making sure the vector router and integration was working 100% and was 100% safe with the amount of funds we'd have locked in it was taking a little bit more time than expected. So we identified this other route to getting things working and performant right away. And then we'll be working with the Connex team to loop back around on the router work and vector integration afterwards.
Okay, and should we be aware of any kind of fundamental limitations of this approach? Like do parallel allocations now matter again for scalability, or just things like that?
I don't really have any specifics for worrying about there. We're gonna have an announcement when we do release this software and include some instructions and some extra information, but that'll be coming from Giannis and Zach.
Thanks.
Okay, great. Any other
and
questions?
Then just
on
I guess a little bit more on the infrastructure side, the only difference will be you don't have to use a vector node anymore. So it'll actually just simplify your setup.
Right, so we're still run with our service nodes, scaling our service nodes if we need to.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, since we're still in Repo Watch, Seb, is there anything else, any other stuff that you've been keeping an eye on that you want to discuss or get some input on?
No, not really.
Anyone else have any other PRs or anything software related that they want to discuss? Okay, pushing through it quickly. So this week in migration, I'm just looking at where we are on the schedule. So no new workshops this week. There was one scheduled around cost modeling, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think it was the cost modeling one, cost modeling performance that's been pushed back to next week. I'll pull out the doc here and see if it's been updated.
Yep, that's correct.
Okay, so that's workshop number 3, cost model and performance, is now on May the 20th. Apart from that, we are still in phase 1. We will get to the enzyme subgraph management piece imminently. But that's all I had in the migration space. Is there anything else anyone wants to talk about regards to migration apart from the issue with the enzyme subgraph? Okay, moving on. So I moved the subgraph, the subgraph integration or the subgraph issue to the governance space. Now, this is just my own judgment. I feel like this is a much wider issue than just, one specific subgraph. But I think for the benefit of everybody who's on the call here, we have Fubi, who is the developer of the subgraph for Enzyme. Fubi, would you be able to give us a breakdown of what exactly went wrong here? Because I know you've been in the chats, you've been talking to indexers and providing your own valuable input as to why you think things have gone wrong. I know that you've mentioned a very specific issue. Me personally, I test sync to the subgraph, and I can corroborate that it failed at this exact feature that you mentioned. So if you could give us a little rundown on things from your perspective, I think that would set the stage pretty well for a discussion.
Sure, yeah. Right, so first of all, our protocol is upgradable. And last week we had an incident. We discovered a bug in one of our smart contracts that required a upgrade to our deployed smart contracts, and a redeployment of a large portion of our protocol. And we then had to trigger migrations of all of the different users that have smart contracts deployed within our protocol. And in that upgrade procedure, we have a fail-safe mechanism that wasn't properly tested. That code path was not tested in our subgraph development process, which is our own fault. But basically what happened was that this fail-safe mechanism was triggered for a couple of volts, and the event that was emitted at that for those volts was not properly covered in the subgraph mappings. And so, yeah, we had a bug in the subgraph. That's what caused the issue. There were other failures that were described by other indexers. Those were unrelated, but the one particular error that was definitely a bug in the subgraph code was about this migration failed event. If you saw that one in your logs, then well, you had the error that I just described.
Yeah, so that's the exact one that I had. I know that the early sort of the first person that was picking up on troubles was Alex. Alex, you want to talk a bit about your experience?
Yeah. So I was thinking that subgraph was up to Chainhead, and I didn't have the failed subgraphs data, like from the database. I didn't know it was constantly erroring out, but at some point my POI started diverging from others on chain, and I was like, what the hell happened? And I started digging around and eventually wanted to like fix my dashboards and to have them all working again. And when I opened the subgraph failures database, I saw 197 entries with the subgraph erroring out every like couple hundred blocks and just continuing chewing through the blocks like nothing happened. And this was happening on all of my 5 machines. And all the logs, I mean not the logs, but the failures themselves, I have sent them to Ford. But I am not entirely sure what happened there. But shortly after, like a few 2-3 days later, I think it crapped out for everyone else. So that's that.
Yeah, so it was a specific point for me where it failed. Like I could see, when we first looked at the logs, Alex, on Sunday, yeah. I think Saturday or Sunday, we took a look at your logs to see what it was doing, and it looked like there was a lot of problematic stuff happening. But then when I actually synced it myself, I saw what you were seeing, but it was chugging away absolutely fine until a very specific error came about. And then now when I look at my database, I only have one error in my database logs, and it's this specific error related to that migration issue that Fubi outlined.
No, I can't even get there. Mine fails like after I encountered those 170 whatever errors, I nuked the subgraph of the database like entirely, and then I started resyncing it, and then now it just hits a random block up about, I don't know, 1.5 weeks ago, and it crashes there. And every time I try to restart the graph node, it picks it back up, it goes through another few blocks, and then it craps out again. Rinse and repeat it. I can't get to the block where you guys are getting. I tried 5 different ETH nodes.
OE?
Yes. 2 OEs and like, I don't know, 5 TurboGeth or something. Nothing can sync it up to the error that you guys are getting. And I'm about to try it again on my home computer, but I have a very bad CPU, and it will take a while until it can sync it.
Do you have information on which block number it starts throwing these errors?
It's not a specific block number, it's a range of blocks, a random range of blocks up about 1.5 weeks ago, but I can give you more details. I can just send you the whole subgraphs failure database, like table.
Yeah, that would be great, thanks. Yeah.
Awesome.
Those are the call reverted errors that you were sharing with me.
Yes. So when I saw the errors, there were a lot of call reverted things, and shortly after, and then I think it started failing actually in the database. Well, I'll talk with Fabi and I'll give him all the info I can gather.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm trying to look into this potential non-determinism with calls, contract calls, where like these errors that you shared with me, and I saw a few other reported were showing call reverted. And I looked into it a little bit further, and they're pretty simple view functions that I don't think really ever should be reverted. So I'm trying to identify why those are being reverted. In the next week, I might ask you guys to send some test Ethereum call queries to your ETH nodes to try to identify why that's happening. But I'm investigating that right now.
Is there a multi-call contract in the mix?
Sorry, what
I'm
contract?
not sure.
Is there a multi-call contract in the mix? Like a contract that allows you to batch execute, calls and get them back in a single response?
No. At least not in the Enzyme protocol.
It's an interesting case. They're pretty simple view functions too. They pretty much just access a variable on the contract. One hypothesis is that the variable was not instantiated yet, so it's returning a null response, and the graph node is interpreting that as a revert. But it's just a hypothesis right now. I found that on a lot of the blocks that the revert was happening, it happened to be the block in which that contract was created. So I'm wondering if there's something specific there around some ETH clients not handling that in the ways that others do.
Alex, are you using some kind of proxy to distribute load across your ETH nodes?
We do only like the proxy only connects it to Open Ethereum's. But I tried targeting specific nodes and couldn't get it to work.
Yeah, I feel like a proxy could cause this.
Yeah, no, I tried with TurboGeth. I was targeting like each individual TurboGeth with each individual machine, like graph node, and it was basically the same behavior.
Okay, but did you try against a dedicated OE instance without anything in between?
I think I did. I'm not entirely sure. Right now at home, I'm doing it on like directly to Ethereum, but like it will take a while.
Especially if you're using a proxy that is layer 7 aware and it's actually, doing some kind of parsing or transformation of the response. I could certainly see how that could land in an error like that.
But it's weird. Why is the only subgraph that has done this thus far for us?
Well, there's one thing that is very special about our protocol. We have a lot of different factory contracts that spawn a lot of data source templates on the subgraph. So what Ford is describing with data access in the same block in which the contract was deployed happens very often in our case.
I'm wondering if it's also possible to model sort of, I know we've talked in the past about complexity of subgraphs, but, do we have a way to sort of measure the complexity of the subgraph in terms of the cost to index it, like the compute cost to index it? Is it high on that scale if there's such a scale exists? And is that potentially why some people may struggle with it if maybe they don't have the capacity to do so? Just thinking out loud.
Yeah, I'm just thinking like the RPC parallelism might be too high. It might be overwhelming the nodes and they're, giving weird data that's state inconsistent or something. I think a good measure of that computational complexity relevant to Enzyme might be the number of dynamic data sources or just generally contracts that are watched.
Yeah, we have designed our contracts with design for subgraph development in mind. So we are using a lot of data from the event payloads directly, and we're not actually making many calls on chain. So the number of calls in our case should be fairly low compared to the complexity of the subgraph, or relative to the complexity of the subgraph. One thing, however, that we are doing now, also in response to this incident, is to split up our subgraph, because we are monitoring the Enzyme core protocol, but we're also monitoring a bunch of contracts that we are interacting with. First and foremost, the entire Chainlink Oracle universe. And that is by far the biggest number of entities in our subgraph. And by removing that and moving that into its own subgraph separately, synchronization of the Enzyme core subgraph should be a lot faster and also less problematic and less complex.
I can't wait for subgraph composition. That'll solve a lot. Yeah.
Because there's a downside to doing this, right? We are losing the graph features, which is like linking of the entities together. But that's a trade-off that we are fine with if it means that we don't have to wait 5 days until we see an error in one of the subgraphs after deploying them.
So I understand that we are currently waiting on a more formal response. Ford has put out his opinion on what indexers should do right now, which I concur with as well, which is that you should OXO it out, the POI right now, and start putting that allocation to work on another subgraph that you know is syncing to the chain head. However, I believe an official announcement is coming at some point. Ford, is that correct?
Yeah, I think the next step is we'll probably unsignal on that subgraph. So it's like officially de-incentivizing from indexing rewards. And then, like I said earlier, I'd suggest everyone close out their allocations because I don't think there's any way those are going to be valuable and the subgraph will be able to sync.
Stake Machine, I think, was proposing something. He said that maybe we could all close the allocations with a specific POI, like custom POI, this time around. And basically this way everyone gets their rewards, get out of the subgraph and reallocate elsewhere.
That is an idea that I've also floated internally. I think it is technically possible, but I don't know if that's a precedent we want to set. And really this is, normal behavior, though unfortunate, we'll have subgraphs that will fail. And I think this is a really good point of discussion, and we need to talk about exactly how to handle it properly. But this is something we need to all get used to and get ready to handle robustly.
I know that it's always been a topic that's been in the sort of like the list for as long as I personally can remember. I know Brandon has talked about it early on. And I put this conversation under governance because I feel like we need to sort of, although there's various different pieces here, like Fubi mentioned something to do with development frameworks earlier. Chris had some opinion on something. I've already forgotten the name. Chris, there was something about subgraph specification or something. Forgive me if I'm getting that wrong. But what I'm trying to say is that I feel like this conversation needs to be sourced from one place, and then the individual pieces that might come out of it, fine, they can go wherever they need to go, whether it's a technical discussion or otherwise. But I think we need to have some sort of framework here on how we manage subgraphs as they go into production. How do we manage subgraphs when there's a fatal error? How do we manage subgraphs when there are going to be upgrades? Because all three of those situations are now financial They're not just financial decisions for the developer who might be, deploying a DApp. It's now a financial decision for the data layer of the DApp and the people who are involved with delivering that. So I'm interested to hear both technical and governance type initiatives that people, or enterprise process type initiatives that people have in mind around managing subgraphs and how we can get more serious about managing them, since money is now very much at the forefront when it comes to the subgraphs themselves.
Absolutely. And this is like you said, it touches on a lot of roles and technical aspects. So I think, a forum post and a long discussion is warranted here. And this is a really good chance for everyone here in Indexers to have input on how you think we can make this more robust. A few things that I see coming out of this are, more robust indexer agent tooling around POIs, around allocation management, and comparing against other indexers, strategies and discussions around like how this should play out on the network, and how the different roles should act. And then, there's some grants that are already in place, but they maybe need pushing forward. So like the unit testing framework that was mentioned earlier could help test subgraphs ahead of time so we can avoid these errors in the first place. And that's just like some of the initial ideas. So this is a good time for everyone to have input here and for us to really build out robust processes around this.
Yeah, I do wonder how much of this can be a automated process and how much of it needs the human touch. I've come from a large scale enterprise IT environment, which is finally starting to take on the sort of ethos of continuous integration and all that good stuff. But there's also a benefit to having there's a process in enterprise lifecycle called production integration, which is a job that is a thankless job, but has to be done, right? And any project that wants to go into production, they have to get past production integration in order to get to production. And it's very much a human, it's a job of herding cats. In this case, herding indexers or herding subgraph developers, so that we're all on the same page when these various different events happen. So, one of the things I will definitely be putting into that discussion is how much of this can be code and how much of this needs a human touch, somewhere in the process.
I think is governance, and what was it, the last protocol town hall? I think Brandon, was it GIP03 that kind of seeks to, almost add a degree of determinism around structured process for things like subgraph upgrades. I think like those processes and the formalization of process for developers and indexes to roll out updates to subgraphs are the prerequisite. Once that process is formalized and it makes sense and everybody's bought in, we can come to the technical solutions.
Yeah, agreed. Does anybody want to? Any other people want to? Yeah, go for it, Seb.
Like in this particular case, we had the opportunity to check the POIs on chain, and we found out that we get errors. But in general, like someone has to go first, because otherwise we cannot really compare our generated POI to anything that we find on chain. So, like in case there is some subgraph who errors and is non-deterministic, then at least one person, like the first person, will make itself prone to slashing. I think this is also a governance-related task to figure out ways like how to not punish the one who didn't have a chance to compare his POI.
I suggested something to Ford, something around trusted nodes added in the POI checker. So basically you add a bunch of friends query nodes separate from your infrastructure, and it would check against their data. Then it doesn't have to be on chain.
Yeah, that would be really nice, and I have that on the back burner, but really one thing I want to reiterate here is that the arbitration group is not meant to punish software issues. So if you are acting in good faith, you're indexing a subgraph, and you aren't aware of the fact that your POI has diverged from the other indexers, that's not a case where we're trying to punish you. So, as we work through potential determinism issues between infrastructure setups and graph node versions, we're going to try to be flexible around the arbitration and the disputes.
I may be wrong here, but I believe an allocation is for a specific subgraph deployment.
Correct.
So yeah, so that means subgraph errors will happen, and we will land up in this situation in the future, and that's not something that we can ever fix. It's just the nature of software development at sufficient scale, and given that the allocation is tied to a specific deployment, even upgrading the subgraph to a new deployment and a new IPFS hash and getting everything running again will still leave us in the position that the POI for that specific allocation is questionable.
Yeah, and I also don't understand why the indexers need to be punished for other people's faults, basically.
But I think what Ford is saying is that that's not the case, right? Like, we have the arbitration process, and we have the kind of meat space involvement in slashing to take a subjective perspective on what should be slashed and what shouldn't. It's not purely like a data-driven technical matter.
And it's not just about the subgraph being at fault or whatever due to a bug. Obviously, in this case, that was the case. But just to maybe explain our use case and how we are building our protocol, we are incrementally adding new protocol integrations on a nearly weekly basis. And so it is not unlikely for us to have a requirement to roll out new subgraph versions on a bi-weekly or monthly schedule, actually. And there's just no way around it, because it belongs to that one subgraph. It belongs to our one core protocol. And there's no way to split it up, because we need these relations in the data structures. So it's just something to keep in mind, that this is something that will happen regularly. Even if there's not a bug in the subgraph, redeployments will happen and have to be possible to some extent.
Somewhat related to that, it would be good to have some process for indexes to follow, or maybe this is a testnet thing, but I think grafting new subgraph deployments onto existing ones is something that sounds like we're going to need in the network sooner rather than later.
And that's a complex thing to achieve, right? It's my understanding.
The easiest
Yeah,
way
that'll
to-
require a lot more
Go ahead.
discussion. We do have that. There's the subgraph grafting feature that is available on the hosted service right now. But as to how to manage that on the network, I think that requires a little bit more work and discussion to hone in on a process there.
I think the easiest way to go around these failure issues that we just seen is to have a tighter communication between the subgraph developers and the indexers. And when they want to update their subgraph, they give everyone a 24-hour or 48-hour period of time where they can close their allocations and run away from that in case it blows up again.
Yeah, so this all plays into the idea of having an actual process and potentially having humans involved in the process, right? So how much of it can actually live on the gateway, the subject of upgrading, and how much of it needs to live in a forum or in a repo or whatever, somewhere where people can talk and see what's going on, right? I mean, this is quite a complex topic, right? Because what if some indexers aren't paying attention, right? Are serving a huge amount of the query volume for that specific subgraph. We need to think about all of these things. It's the whole, soup to nuts process. Not just how we do it, but also how do we alert to make sure people are aware that we're doing it, that sort of stuff. So I think this topic is quite a big one, but we need to start addressing it now.
I think as much of that process as we can actually codify and make as kind of automatic as possible, we should. I think humans are a necessity within processes like these, but it would be better to constrain human involvement or heavy human involvement to the unhappy path, so slashing arbitration or whatever, and as much of the happy path as possible should be codified.
Oh, 100% agreed. Absolutely.
One important signal that we haven't mentioned in this little brief discussion is the name signaling on subgraphs. So, in the purely on-chain protocol signals, the subgraph developer could unsignal on the subgraph that they are sunsetting or that has failed, and then signal a large amount on the new subgraph that they want people to move over to. So that is one, built-in automated process that the indexers can be watching for.
Yeah, but the allocation themselves won't migrate to the new one.
No,
well,
but
you can have an indexing rule that says, only index this deployment if the signal is above a certain threshold, and then it'll close the allocation when it goes below that threshold, for example. You could also have, external monitoring tools.
Yeah, but
exactly.
if the subgraph blew up, there's no closing allocation involved anymore.
Yeah,
Well,
but
actually, if the subgraph fails, you can close it in that epoch because you should have a valid POI for the start block of that epoch. So
yeah, you only have like
a
few hours.
There is no, the epochs are a day on mainnet, and you have till the next epochs because the previous, in the arbitration charter, you can submit POIs for the previous epoch and still be valid.
Interesting.
It would be awesome if we could. I feel like, if I kind of think of a blank slate, what do I want? It would be awesome if subgraph developers could have some kind of almost like subgraph deployment pipeline. So as an indexer, I could say, okay, I want to index, this particular subgraph, and then the developer of that subgraph can release updates, and any kind of migration logic or grafting logic is located in the new subgraph deployment, and the indexing software could automatically begin indexing that new release, maybe verifying that it is code signed by the developer, so there's no risk of a kind of rogue subgraph slipping into the pipeline. I think practices like that can automate a lot of the update process, and remove the need to manually coordinate and assess these things.
You mean like an upgradable proxy contract?
I suppose as an analogy, with cryptographic assurance that the deployment is of the right provenance.
Okay, that was a great discussion, and I think there's going to be a lot more discussion around this in the very near future. Do we have any questions in the chat?
I also think if the graph is working as intended and people start publishing their small pet project subgraphs on the decentralized network, it's kind of risky somehow to start picking up subgraphs that come from untrusted sources. You have this advantage of being early and getting a high share of the inflation rewards on that one in the beginning, but somehow it also puts hobbyist subgraph developers on a disadvantage, because how do you really want to convince someone to start indexing your subgraph? First, because you're relatively unknown, and second, because in the beginning you update more frequently, and it would be nice to have a process there that ensures indexers that you have like a robust upgrading mechanism in place. And of course, having some test bed and like indexing everything before really allocating to it
I think
would also make a big
allocation.
difference.
I think allocation migration, similar to signal migration, would be very beneficial in this situation. I'm talking about this specific case where you are allocated towards a subgraph and then it blows up. And
You mean on the smart contract level, you just
yeah,
like you don't close the allocation, you just start indexing the new update.
yeah, and the allocation that you are going to close is basically going to close for the other deployment.
That would be brilliant.
Yeah, and it will solve a lot of the issues. I don't know if that's possible, though.
I'm trying to think about how that's really functionally different than a close and then open a new allocation.
Yeah, I don't think it is. Like, I think you can get the same user experience without messing with the protocol. And you know, I wouldn't approach it at that layer. I think like as an indexer, you know, some of the problem here is that I do due diligence towards a particular project, you know, a particular subgraph developer and a particular project, if you will. But when I allocate, I'm allocating towards a very specific, immutable deployment of that subgraph. And I kind of want to allocate on a slightly more abstract level. I want to allocate to a project and then have some automatic pipeline in a secure way allows the subgraph developer to roll out updates to that. And then, you know, the indexing software can seamlessly handle the allocation management and, you know, close and open and all that kind of stuff.
Allocating to a project is really interesting because here's another thing. If we split up our subgraph into 3 pieces, and all of these different 3 pieces have different costs for indexing them, we need all 3 pieces to operate our DApp. But indexing the 3 different pieces will not be equally expensive. Some are more complex than others and more entities than others. And we will also not be querying them in the same frequency. So for instance, the price data subgraph will be queried very frequently. The subgraph for some of the core pieces of the protocol won't be frequently queried. So that's also a consideration where I think multi-subgraph allocation is something that would be interesting because it's about, at the end of the day, it's about a DApp that needs one or multiple subgraphs to function.
Oh, you split your signal then on all 3, and probably
Right.
solved.
Yeah. But
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And then it's important to have all 3 of those. You know, maybe it's not valuable to just have one as much.
Exactly, and they all have to be in the exact same version that we expect them to be in, because otherwise the queries obviously would yield weird results in combination.
One like strawman proposal there would be to add a rule type that would be for a specific wallet address. So, and you could specify, you know, your Enzyme team's address, and then any subgraphs that are by that address that have some minimum level of signal, you would index. It could be an interesting approach to that.
Yeah, really lightweight there. Yeah, interesting.
Okay, folks, shall we wrap up the discussion then of the subgraph management piece for now? The only thing I had left on the governance section was just to make sure everyone's aware that GIP 3 was deployed last Friday and has been deployed with no issue to my knowledge. Was executed via the council multisig on Friday and then monitored over the weekend. I do not have anything else on my list. Does anybody have anything else on their mind that they'd like to talk about or discuss or get opinions on in the last 8 minutes?
Cohen's got his hand up.
Oh, let's get Cohen in. Welcome, Cohen. Can't hear you.
Yeah, no, your microphone isn't working. Nope.
Maybe talk in the chat, Cohen, and we can relay it here.
I think you're gonna have to expand, I think, a bit more on that, Cohen.
Okay, I think what he's mentioning is a network name registry, so like a decentralized managed registry of all the network names as we start to expand out the supported networks.
Ah, okay. Yes, okay, I remember you mentioning this before, Cohen. So this is standardizing the names for the different blockchains that are being or can be indexed.
Yeah, as Chris mentions, there is chainlist.org that is a good resource for the different chains. And there is a chain ID that I believe is a canonical identifier for chains and is used in a lot of places. But I don't personally know of a source that has like string identifiers that are consistent and people use.
Handshake has been around for a while now. We really need you on audio, Cohen, because this isn't really conducive to a discussion. This is just silence and then people reading what you're typing. I want to go back, though. Let's just make sure this is covered off. Otherwise, Payne's making little snarky comments at me in the chat. So we've got 5 minutes left. Let's see if anyone wants to talk about what Stake Machine has to say. If we can't be safe with official partner subgraphs, what about these small unknown subgraphs? If the officials fail, won't we? If official fail won't be compensated, it will look strange. If official,
I think we will be compensated. So even a 0x0 POI on Enzyme will probably not be slashed, because of recognition that the subgraph failed, and that's not an indexing problem.
0x0 POI means you're giving up your rewards, meaning you get 0.
That's true. I guess a fake POI, we should probably wait for the announcement with the official advice.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing for me there is to see how the actual arbitration process itself works in reality, right? So State Machine's asking about, what are the current disputes in the mainnet? When and how are they resolved? Is that on a schedule? Are we looking at a world where the arbitration guys are exhausted because there's thousands of disputes for them to deal with? Those types of questions.
In this instance, also, I'd like to understand what the financial impact was for the indexes that were affected by this issue. Maybe there's something we can do from our allocation.
There's nothing to do from your allocation. There's just getting a consensus within the graph team and the governance to close those allocations with a valid POI. I mean, valid non-0x0. And then everything is safe for everyone. Get out of there, take their rewards, and move on to other subgraphs. But having indexers getting punished for an error in the subgraph code and one of the migration partners, that's just weird.
It's not going to happen. I mean, let's be clear. I mean, that's my opinion, right? But I mean, common sense prevails here, right?
No, I mean, that's punished by having the POI set to 0x0. I'm not referring to slashing.
I'd also say, first of all, thanks, Fubi. That's an awesome sentiment. But I don't think that we should set the precedent that subgraph developers should consider compensating indexes for subgraph issues. Subgraphs will fail. Like, we all just got to get used to that and develop a process for dealing with it. It's okay.
Yeah, totally my opinion. Maybe it would be possible to just like mark failed subgraphs as, okay, this one can be closed without a valid POI via some governance module, so we have this resolved.
But then
so
again,
I'd like to add a feature or, reiterate one thing that can be done is if you're watching your subgraphs really closely, or like I said, I could add a feature to index or agent that would close that allocation immediately if it fails. And you would, at that point, you would have a valid POI. And I think that would be a good way to do things moving forward. Of course, we can't do that now because it failed a while ago, but just wanted to reiterate that.
Yeah, I like the idea of having a switch, so that's an option.
I wonder how the subgraph availability oracle could feed into asserting that there has been a failure and I guess playing a part in that switch.
That's an interesting thought, actually.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I think that would be something that would make a lot of sense to fold into the availability oracle so we can all agree upon that failure.
Isn't the subgraph availability oracle just nullifying the rewards, and what exactly is it doing? I know that it can be used to like mark subgraphs that are not shouldn't be eligible for rewards, but what else?
That's the big thing. So right now, without that, it's tough for you as an individual to know whether the data is available for a subgraph. So it's meant to be a source of truth for, is that subgraph valid? Is that subgraph available on IPFS? Because IPFS can have things available for a bit and then not available after that. So there's a bit of non-determinism. So the availability oracle is constantly checking. And it could also be checking to make sure that the subgraph is syncable. And maybe that's not something that should be the purvey of the availability oracle, but it's a good idea.
And what happens if a subgraph is marked for non-eligibility of rewards? Will the indexer agent stop allocating to it? Like, even if you want, like, if you're not aware of that subgraph being on that list, can you still allocate towards it?
It's a good question. I'll have to double check. I believe when the indexer agent looks on chain for subgraphs to allocate towards, it filters out any that have been marked by the availability oracle as unavailable or not valid.
Okay, that's
built into the agent.
Thank you.
Right, we are out of time, guys. Thank you, everyone, for your contributions today. It's been an interesting discussion. Fubi, especially, thank you very much for joining us today. Really appreciate your insight to things from the developer side. Keep an eye out, guys, in the forums. I don't know if it's going to come from me, if it's going to come from someone in Engine Node, but there'll definitely be a discussion kicking off around subgraph management process and how we deal with this more long term. So again, thanks everyone for joining, and we'll see you again next week.
Really good discussion today, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you too.
Guys.
Thanks all.
Thanks.